Welcome to Flavor Text, a monthly podcast where we discuss the gameplay narrative of Arkham Horror, the card game, scenario by scenario. I'm CrabbyTerror8, and I'm joined by my erstwhile co-host, Kevling. How are you, Kevling?
I'm fine, thank you, mate. How are you?
Yeah, well, my belly button's been puckering and unpuckering since I found out about the edge of the earth. Oh, yeah, I'm excited.
Biggest news in ages, isn't it?
I know. I had to take a Bex and a lie down. I'm still recovering from that. Yeah, so, and it's all going to be one great big box or two great big boxes, and it's all things are changing.
It's exciting stuff, although my wallet is probably a little bit nervous about the idea of $100 worth of content all dropping at the same time, if that's how it plays out. I can cope with paying the equivalent of $15 a month for a Mythos pack, but because you don't really notice, I'm not used to having to save up for Arkham Horror.
Yeah, I know. It's quite an outlay. I mean, I can usually slip a $15 purchase under the radar, can slip by unnoticed. No, that's not true. My partner doesn't look at what I'm spending, but you're right. It is a big outlay in one hit, isn't it? So
yeah. Although having said that, I did see a post on Facebook from. I do apologise if he's listening because I've forgotten his name. He runs a game shop, but he's had tentative release dates of August for the Investigators and October for the campaign. So at least if they are split off like that, it's a little bit more palatable to the wallet.
Yeah. And I was listening to the Mythos Busters podcast, so they were talking about this, and MJ was saying that it also gives the opportunity for people who play as a group on a regular basis together. They can
that was a really good point, wasn't it?
Pool their resources.
That.
Yeah. So
just buy one campaign and 4 sets of player cards.
Exactly. So I think, and I can imagine, from the perspective of a retailer not having to sort of range bazillions of little cards and things, and just the cost, I'm assuming, to FFG just in terms of shipping and things, instead of all these separate pieces of plastic and everything else, it's all going out. It makes the whole thing a lot more efficient from that perspective as well. So,
and I think that's been reflected in the price as well. I was trying to work it out. It comes out at something like, if you add up all of the Mythos packs and the deluxe, something like $140 US dollars, whereas obviously it's $100 for this.
Yes.
And on that podcast, MJ did confirm that we are getting pretty much the same amount of content. Also, from our point of view, from this podcast, it's going to make it interesting because it's going to change the way they can design the scenarios themselves. It sounds like we're going to be venturing to a branching narrative for the Edge of the Earth. I think the box said that a scenario can be between 4 and 10 scenarios, depending on the path you take through it.
Right.
So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and apparently it's all going to be in a spiral-bound book. It's sounding a little bit Gloomhaven-y. I mean, not too much, but it has that kind of feel about it, and I don't mind that. I don't
tiny
mind
folded-up pieces of paper.
No, that's all.
No more waiting for FFG to update the PDF on the website.
Yeah, all those sorts of things. I mean, the one thing MJ did say from a story perspective, which is interesting, from our podcast perspective, is, and I guess only at the time, because then but there's that idea of a story unfolding over time and sort of waiting for the next installment, almost like a serial kind of episodic thing. That a bit of that will be lost, but I think that the upside is quite significant. I don't know. I didn't hear. I was a bit concerned about the return to boxes because I really like those. Is this going to mean?
Same here.
There's going to be no return to boxes anymore?
I must have. I did ask that question when Mythos Busters asked for questions, but it didn't get picked. So presumably it was something they knew that she wouldn't be able to talk about. But they did say in that, MJ did say that the new campaign box will have a plastic insert that it's designed to store sleeved cards, and I have heard as well that it'll have space for the investigator cards in there as well. Yeah. So everything will fit in the one large box. So that kind of takes away one of the purposes of the return boxes, doesn't it?
It does, and which it would be a slight pity because I like the design of the return to boxes. They look like those old-fashioned library card drawers.
Yeah, which I've got them on a shelf behind.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking at them now, and it's sort of quite whimsical the way they're like that. I quite like that. But
I've even made fake return to boxes for the campaigns that don't have them yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, that's all very exciting, and we'll ensure this podcast continues well into the 2030s at this rate. I can just imagine us in 2038. Here we are. Do I have a text? I'll be well retired by then or something.
Oh, definitely, yes. Yeah, we got plenty of content to get through before then, haven't we? Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah. Now, speaking of which, I just want to say I'm really delighted by the response we've had to this podcast, Kevling. It's been really brilliant. So much positive feedback. So many people saying, "Oh, this is just what I've been looking for. This is just perfect." Somebody's actually tackling the story. So I'm so delighted that that's what other people, not just us, but other people have been sort of looking for, which has perhaps been not so easy to come across, for Arkham Horror. So I was really, really, really delighted to hear.
Yes, we have had a few people asking about lore as well, and are we going to be digging into the stories? And like we said before, that's not really the point of this podcast. We'll touch on it where necessary, but it's more about how the mechanics work and how they help tell the story, isn't it?
But we would encourage people to go and, there's plenty of audio, physical books, obviously, but also, audio books and all kinds of things that, on YouTube or other places where you can listen to the stories. Now, before I say this, I suppose we should just say spoilers as well. I suppose if you're new to the, what's our spoiler policy again, Kevling? I always forget what we say.
I mean, the thing is, we're going to be dissecting each campaign scenario. Yeah. So if you've not played it before, then this is definitely not the place to start, unless you don't care about spoilers. We will be explaining what decisions then have a knock-on effect on what other aspects of the scenario and things like that. The official spoiler policy is we will be spoiling it.
Pretty much everything. So if you've never played it, please stop now. If you've not played any of the Dunwich Legacy scenarios, yes, please stop now, go and play it. If you've played it once, also you might not want to listen because we will be going through the branching paths and things like that, so we will be covering everything. And just to be clear, there are some light but very minor spoilers for some of the other campaigns in Arkham Horror the card game, Forgotten Age, Carcosa, some of the others. So if you don't want anything at all to be spoiled at all, then I'm just warning you here. And also, if you're hoping we're going to be doing sort of tips and tricks, gameplay, optimizing, winning the scenario, we kind of touch on that, but that's not really something we're going to be covering either.
No.
In that way. Now, just on the first, the episode 1, not episode 0, but episode 1, where we covered extracurricular activity and the house always wins. We got some feedback. We got some people just gave us some thoughts, which I thought were worth just reading out. Luckily, though, Kevling, nobody said we'd said something that was totally wrong or erroneous, so that was a relief.
Thank goodness for that, yes.
Yeah, that's what I was most worried about. It was like, you said what? That's not right. What about the 14th branching path? So that didn't happen. But a couple of people said a couple of things. So I think it's Anna Physic, I do apologise if I've pronounced that wrong, who left us a number of thoughts and feedback, and thank you for all of that. But the one thing they did mention, which I thought was a good point, was on Act 3A, Campus Safety. It says you have only moments to react. You could warn the students in the dormitories and escort them to safety, or continue your task of searching the faculty offices for Professor Rice, hint, hint, or perhaps you could try and slay the beast that threatens the campus. Now, I think we kind of probably were a bit strong on the idea that the text wasn't really telling you to go and look for Rice in the
Yes.
faculty offices. So I think Anna Physic was just making the point that it does say to do that. Yeah,
It's a valid point, and with the name of this podcast being Flavour Text, we made the criminal mistake of not actually paying attention to the flavour text.
yeah.
Must try harder.
And I think the other thing is, I'm kind of, I always come at these things from a solo or a two-handed game. So I forget sometimes that, of course, if you're playing with 4 people, it's much easier to split up and sort of do various different things.
Yes.
Than
You
it would
could
be
all
if
have a
you
go
play
at moving each part of that story along, and then whichever one triggers first.
Exactly.
That's the path that follows.
Exactly. We also got Anastasius, I think it is, also said...
Have we only got people whose names start with A?
That's right. It's B.
Or have
Next
you got
time
a
will be
very
B
long
and
list?
C. That's right. These are just the A's. We'll get to Z in another hour. He said, as Morgan is babbling nonsense, maybe he unconsciously cast an invocation for the Yog-Sothoth creatures. No evidence, only a theory. Well, that's interesting, because we were talking about where does this creature come from? Why does it suddenly magically appear? You know, maybe Morgan accidentally brings it forth.
Interesting.
Yeah, that could happen. Could happen. So there you go. So thank you for that feedback. Thank you for everybody who actually commented. Really appreciated that. Keep that coming, because it's really great to hear what your thoughts are. So thank you. So here we are in episode 2 of the Dunwich Legacy, and I think after last time we're off to the Miskatonic Museum.
We are, yes. I think where we left it was at the end of... after being sent off in multiple directions by Armitage, he has now decided to tell us what is actually going on, or we found his diary and we now know what's going on, either or, depending on whether he was kidnapped or not. And as you touched on earlier, this is where it sort of fills us in here on the background, which is the Dunwich Horror.
Yep.
So that's the introduction we have here on Scenario 2, where we actually get a bit of a glimpse on what is actually going on.
You know, summarising it quite nicely, I think.
Yeah, just tells you this is what you need to know. This is who was involved. Funnily enough, it's the people we've already come across so far in the story.
Yeah.
And now let's go and find the Necronomicon is basically the task of this scenario.
Yeah, and it does a good job of sort of trying to, because it says in that background that, Whatley was really after this sort of new translation of the Necronomicon. So it's attempting, before you go to the Miskatonic Museum, to sort of really build up that, this is a big deal. This is an important part of whatever horrible things are going on. This is an important thing that this sort of this sort of crew of nasty people are trying to get their hands on, that Henry Armitage has been trying to kind of, and his friends have been trying to stop. I have to say though that one of the things I found because part 1 is, if you read part 1, that's because Armitage has been kidnapped, as you say. Part 2, and Henry Armitage hasn't been kidnapped, he's still around. I found part 2 much more compelling about why I should care about running off to some dusty museum to find a book than with part 1, where you're sort of reading his notes, which didn't feel quite as... The threat didn't feel quite as immediate. I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, part 1, it's more like, maybe his kidnappers might want to get the book. I suppose we ought to go to the museum to stop them. I mean, it's a little bit of a leap, but at least the second one it's more of a directive, isn't it? Oh no, I've given it to Harold. You must go and make sure he's safe.
Yeah. Part 1's like, they're equally equally worried. I think it talks about being equally worried. Here we go. Although you are worried about your mentor, you are equally worried that Armitage's kidnappers might get their hands on the Necronomicon. So it's kind of having a bob each way and saying, well, you're kind of 50-50. Whereas, like you say, in part 2, it's like Armitage is this quest giver saying, please go and do this. This is really important. So it's hardly like you're going to say to Armitage, no. Not interested in doing that. Whereas if he's not there, it just feels a bit weaker. I mean, you don't have a choice, obviously. It's not like you can decide not. Well, you could. I suppose you could decide not to do the Miskatonic Museum. But you know what I mean. It feels like they're not so balanced, and so without Armitage there, it's less. There seems to be less reason to be racing off to the Miskatonic Museum like there is if Armitage is around.
I was just looking back at House Always Wins and what triggers Armitage being kidnapped, and that's basically it's if you end up with Resolution 4 at the House Always Wins, which is you were unconscious for several hours. So it's sort of like one out of the 5 different resolutions for House Always Wins. So I guess most people will be getting the part 2 anyway.
Right.
On a sort of a ratio, only 1 out of the 5 resolutions will give you part 1.
Yeah, okay.
So I guess part 2 is is canon, I guess.
Yeah, I just think they could have made part 1. His scribbles became more and more extreme as he emphasised that we must get this. You know what I mean? They could have kind of revved it up a bit. You really need to go and get this book. Forget the fact that people have been kidnapped. You really got to get this book. You know what I mean? Or something like, if anything happens to me, get the book first. That kind of thing.
That would have been
it just feels like it's a little bit weak.
Yeah, whatever happens, we're off to the museum to try and stop the Necronomicon from falling into the wrong hands. So I suppose the next bit we can talk about the setup. It's there's no change to the setup here based on the outcome of the previous scenarios, but there is this randomised element, so you do get a little bit of replayability there. There's 2 different versions of the admin office and the security office, and they'll get you just randomise the 2 of them and put one of them in play. So I don't think there's any real story impact on either of them. Like, they can't be, can they? Because it's completely random. But at least it changes the gameplay up each time you play it. So you basically got 4 different combinations there, haven't you? Of the 2.
Yeah.
And then the other element of setup is we've got a few new mechanics here. There is the exhibit deck. So that is a set of 6 randomised exhibit hall locations, and it's constructed in such a way that the place we are looking for will be in the bottom 3 of the deck. So it will either be card 4, 5 or 6 in the deck. You just do 2 random piles of 3 and put them together. And then the other thing that we've got is this area called the Void. So that's a completely new thing from this point on. In fact, I played the first part of Innsmouth, and that had a very similar thing going on. And I think that's the only other time I've seen something like this so far.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like an area that the big bad of the scenario can retreat to, sort of out of play, and then come back out of a game at various points. Yeah, so there's various card effects will send him stroke her in or out of the void, as he does air quotes around it. So they're the sort of the new things that have been introduced mechanics wise.
Yeah. So I mean we turn up at the museum entrance, and I think the agenda basically the agenda does 2 things, which is, it seems like this campaign does this a lot. It actually gives away the monster. Right from the start, there's a bad hunting horror out there. So they did that with the previous ones, where they kind of showed you the picture, so you kind of already know that there's going to be a hunting horror there. And it basically, all it does is just, the agenda just sort of reiterates again that that Armitage has given the Latin translation to Harold Walstead, who's the curator of Miskatonic University. He's worried that someone might still be after the book, and you've gone to the museum to recover it. So if you haven't read the background, it's telling it to you again, basically, just saying the same stuff again, and then it talks a little bit about what to do with the hunting horror.
Yeah. And then on the act side, unfortunately, because of the time of day, the museum's locked. How on earth are we going to get in? Yes, so it says, the museum is kept locked. A security guard is visible through the building's front windows, oblivious to his surroundings. Perhaps you can find a way to get his attention and convince him to let you in.
Yeah, it's a classic thing where which happens a lot in these scenarios, where you're gated. You've got to do things to do that, and I do like the opening museum entrance for a couple of reasons. It really kind of does a great job of bringing. It seems that Arkham is full of neoclassical Victorian architecture. And the museum is a classic one with the big columns and the sort of statues out the front. It's a very huge, imposing kind of building.
Demonic demonic gargoyles sat there.
Yeah.
And then really spooky looking trees with the moonlight behind them.
Yeah, and obviously it's not a warm sunny evening either. As you approach, you draw your coat tighter. What's the coat? Is it the survival one? What's it called? The coat that gives you some protection. What's it called?
It's just a
leather coat,
isn't it?
Yes. Draw your coat around your body to keep the wintry air away. The full moon drapes the building in an ominous bright moonlight. So it's certainly a bit like with the campus, right? There's sort of, that was like, you felt like you were in jail, and the fences, they're kind of making it sound like it's really quite spooky.
Yes.
Which is nice. I like that. And as usual, the resign option is rather amusing. I love the resign option.
How important can a book really be anyway?
Let's just walk away.
It's just a book. It's a bit dark, it's spooky, the door's locked. I really can't be bothered.
That's right. I'll just go home to the warm fire and just ignore.
Tap on the window. No, he didn't hear me. Now I'll go.
Exactly. So that's rather nice in that way. It feels like it's going to be a night at the museum kind of thing, doesn't it? It really does.
Definitely, yes. Which is actually the name of one of the act cards.
Yeah, it is. You're right. Yeah. It is true. and like even the picture on the Act 1A, instead of it just being a normal museum, there's doors open with this sort of glowing glow from below, kind of trying to make it look very ominous.
Heading down into the basement or something, yeah.
So
basically we've got two options available to us now, haven't we, here at the entrance?
Yes, we do.
If you look over at museum halls, it says you cannot move into it because it is locked. So our options are, we can either investigate at the entrance to try and find a way in, so basically get clues to advance, or there is this action on the museum halls where we can take an action to test Fight of 5 to try and break down the door. And if you're successful, you immediately advance. So either or, really. It's we try and find a way in, or we force our way in, and each of those will have different consequences later in the scenario. So basically, the choice you make here, it will determine which of the Act 2s you get.
Yep.
So if you break down the door, then you have Act 2, funnily enough called Breaking and Entering. Whereas if you just search for clues, then that is the Night at the Museum.
And there's no consequences in the sense that you've bashed down a door and broken it or anything. It's not like the alarms go off and you get arrested. So it's not really a consequential thing from that perspective, right? It's a bit different to that.
Yeah. Sorry, the other thing I didn't mention as well. If you spend the clues to advance, so you find a way in, and then you progress to Act 1B, that is at the point where you would then take control of Adam Lynch. Whereas at this stage, it looks like, oh, maybe that's the thing to do because you don't get control of anybody at that stage if you break in, but that will then get triggered later. So yeah, you get Adam Lynch and his. So you take control of him, so that means you put him in play.
Yep.
He doesn't take up an ally slot, which is nice, but he only has 1 health, 1 horror. But his bonus ability is basically to help you out on the specific actions in the security office when we get there. But obviously we've not got there yet, so we don't know what the benefit is. So we'll come across that in a moment.
Yeah. And this really triggers what this campaign seems to do quite a bit of, which is, like we saw with the kidnapping, you can't save everybody. This decision right at the beginning essentially dooms either Adam Lynch or Harold Walstead to a horrible death. And there's nothing you can do about it. One of them will die. It's just a question of which one survives and which one dies, unfortunately. So... Yeah, because if you break down the door, Adam Lynch is so spooked he just goes racing off into the museum, sort of just goes bounding off, and it seems like what happens is he just takes a wrong turn and the hunting horror just does him in, kind of thing. Whereas if you take Adam with you, Harold Walstead meets a grisly end instead. It's that kind of thing. So.
Yeah. So at this point then, we are in the museum halls, one way or another, either with Adam Lynch or without. And so now, whichever of the Act 2As we are on, our objective is, if an investigator enters the exhibit hall, restricted hall, advance.
Yeah. So that's pretty straightforward, really, isn't it? Because that's the end game. So I guess the nice thing about this scenario is that, it's not meandering in that sense. It's like once you've gotten into the museum, it's just get to that how you get there, of course, is going to take time, but it's pretty straightforward, right? It's not like there's multiple acts and things to do and people to defeat. It's just like get yourself to the restricted hall, and then once you're there, it's so it's fairly linear, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
And then the way we get to this exhibit hall, which, as we mentioned before, it's in the exhibit hall deck, and it is card 4, 5, or 6 in that pile. So once you're in museum halls and you reveal the location, you can take an action to spend 1 clue per investigator as a group to put the top card of the exhibit deck into play unrevealed. Now, as we found out when we ran through this last week as a refresher, you can game this quite significantly, can't you?
You can.
We potted around, we got enough clues, we put 4 exhibit hall locations into play, and then went and investigated the 4th one, and it was the restricted hall.
Yeah.
It was like a speed run, wasn't it?
It was, which tends to undercut the idea that you're in this spooky museum, you don't know where you're going, and you need to kind of find your way around. I mean, it's going to be more like that the first time you play it, but you're right. The problem with the gaming is that undermines the story in the sense that that's not what you'd be doing, right? You would be sort of wandering around these exhibit halls, and you would be trying to find the right one because you just don't know. Whereas in a way, there's a knowingness to going, oh, we'll just put out 3 of them and just ignore them, and that kind of thing. And so when I think about this scenario, and I think of the museum one in Carcosa. So in Echoes of the Past, it's structured, so there's like 2 floors and so I think they could have done something where maybe you get clues to get into the first part of the museum, which is the first 3, and you've got to do some of that first to allow you to then get into the second 3 or something. Do you know what I mean? Something that would have reflected more a search for the restricted hall rather than you can just put them all out.
Or maybe you could only put one out if there are no unrevealed ones already in play, something like that, to force you to actually search through all of these rooms to try and find the one you're looking for. Whereas we literally went, it's somewhere down the end of the corridor, we'll go in the fourth door, yep, there it is, we're sorted.
There it is, exactly. and the other thing that it makes that sort of even worse is that, and I mean, we'll talk about these locations in a second, but the security in the admin office, whichever one you get, there's not an equal number of clues on them. So in some circumstances, you can end up with 4 clues per investigator from the security and admin office. In some, you could end up with just 2 clues per investigator, which would barely get you through the first 3. So if you're lucky, you can end up with, you can end up in the second 3 lots of exhibit halls just because you happen to get, pull the right 2 locations. I don't know why they made them different. It probably would have been better if they'd made them the same, that you end up with about 3 clues, which gets you the first 3 exhibit halls. And then, like you say, you have to do something else before you can get to the next 3 exhibit halls. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas
I think that must be how it played out for us. We probably had those two clue locations, which meant we had enough clues to reveal 4 halls.
Correct.
I mean, it was still a 1 in 3 chance that 4th one was the restricted location, and we were lucky in that it was. But it does sort of take something out of it.
It does. It takes. It's like some scenario. I think like the first 2 scenarios do a really good job of feeling like you're in the story. You're in a casino and you're asking people questions and trying to get to the back door. Trying to find whoever you're finding, and on campus you're prowling around. But this one, I think they were trying to do that, and it works to a degree. But I think it's just undercut a little bit by the structure. Like you say, you can game it, and also sometimes you can just end up with the restricted hall really quickly, and other times I can imagine you don't, because you only start with 2 clues per investigator from admin and security, and the restricted halls are at the bottom of the 6. You know what I mean? And you just kind of get nowhere. So interesting, isn't it? So I think they refined this idea a little bit more in later campaigns, and I still enjoy this scenario, don't get me wrong, but I think, like you say, you can kind of game it a bit, right?
I think part of the issue is because of the way it instructs you to construct the exhibit deck, is how it is constructed, so it's not completely random. Whereas I can't remember what the name of the scenarios. I think it's later in Dunwich, isn't it, where you have you're looking for a key and a chamber, and they're all hidden behind the locations that are in play.
Oh, Blood on the Altar.
Truly random. Blood on the Altar.
Yeah. Yes.
So I guess we'll be talking about that one in a couple of months.
Yes.
But that is truly random. It's still a similar thing. You're randomising it based on the cards you've got, but you have no idea which of the 6 it is going to be under.
Yes.
So it does force you. I mean, again, you could still be lucky and find it straight away, but you can't game it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right. There's two elements to that: structure and randomness. So it's there's the randomness, but also the locations are structured in a way rather than just being sort of laid out. Whereas in this one, they're sort of just fairly just sort of laid out. You know what I mean? There's no structure to it. It's not like there's different floors of exhibit halls, or there's 2 groups of exhibit halls or something. You know what I mean? There's no additional structure to make it more challenging. I mean, I know there are pairs of exhibit halls which are sort of linked together, which is a bit weird, but there's no kind of structure really. After the first few cards, the security office, admin, entrance, and halls, and then it's just kind of linear, right? You've just got these halls in front of you. They all connect to the museum hall, so it's not as though you have to go through one to get to another. Exactly. Yeah. So it's a bit unstructured from that perspective. Yeah.
I mean, obviously this this mechanic gets refined in the Forgotten Age with the introduction of the Explore mechanic, and that then introduces the idea that you can only put it in play if it meets a certain rule, such as connecting to your location, and that is a more thematic way of exploring. So they've obviously taken on feedback from this as they developed it further in later campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. So so we're in the there's lots of rich flavor text and stuff on some of this admin and security office, aren't there? Sort of, it's interesting how they present them.
Yeah, so the unrevealed side of the admin office, a sturdy wooden door with a plaque next to it reads Administration. In the hall outside the doorway you see a row of paintings depicting the museum's many curators through the years, each adorned with the name and years of employment. And this bit makes me smile. Perhaps it's your imagination. But they look more distressed in recent years.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it?
That is brilliant.
I sort of have this
you
image
can almost
of them.
imagine it's like a I don't know, like an airplane film or something, or Naked Gun, and as you're looking along the corridor, they're looking more and more withered and scared, and probably biting their fingernails on the very last one.
The last guy's hair's everywhere, and he's got this wild look in his eyes, and he's got a gun to his head or something. You know, you can.
And the last one's missing. It's just an empty chair.
There's just that's right. There's just a chair fallen over and a sort of pair of feet or something. That's all oh dear. Yeah, that was good. Yeah, the admin office is. I suppose it's very ordered.
Well, that's your flavour text once you reveal it, isn't it? It is meticulously organised. From the books in alphabetical order on the shelves to the stacks of forms organised by category on each desk. A coat is draped over one of the nearby chairs. Perhaps someone other than the security guard is still here at this late hour.
Tapping his chin.
I'm assuming that's Harold Walstead.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think it's sort of hinting that, like, of course, after the first time you play it, you know there are well, you already know Harold's probably going to be here somewhere, right? But it is hinting that there's somebody else here. I also find it kind of amusing that it's so meticulous that you can investigate if you have 4 or fewer resources or 4 fewer cards in your hand, which sort of suggests that unless you're really well resourced intellectually and cognitively, you're just not going to be able to find anything because it's so neat and tidy or something. I'm not sure.
That almost seems the wrong way round, though.
Yeah,
surely,
it does,
if it's
doesn't
so
it?
neat and tidy, it should be easier to find things.
That's right. But for some reason, you've got to have more than 4 cards or more than 4 resources, depending on which option you choose. And for some reason, it's kind of a bit strange. Like I said, the one where you need 4 or fewer, you need more than 4 resources, has only 1 clue per investigator, but a shroud of 1. You know what I mean? So there's this sort of difference between the two. I'm not really sure why they made that decision to do it that way, but obviously, I think the trade-off with 1 shroud is you're better off more clues than fewer clues.
Yeah, and I'm guessing the fact that it's a low shroud either way, 1 and 2, that does reflect how well organised it is, and it would be easy to find something. So I'm not quite sure on thematically why there's the restriction on the resources and cards in hand, other than to maybe just slow you down a little bit.
Slow you down. That's exactly that's all there is.
Yeah. And then over at the security office, the unrevealed flavour text is a plaque next to this doorway reads Security. Funny that. The door is ajar, and inside you catch the scent of blood.
Not as secure as it perhaps would suggest.
And then once you're in there, somebody must have left the security office in a hurry. Blood stains the floor under the desk nearby. There are some maps of the museum in here as well. So, yeah, I don't quite follow the logic here of there being blood in the security office. Because we could, depending on how you played it, you could have the security guard stood right next to you. So whose blood is it?
Yeah, that's right. And we know someone's going to get murdered. It's either Adam or Harold, but they don't get murdered in the security office. They get murdered somewhere in the in museum. They don't get murdered here. So you're right.
I think it probably would have worked better if, obviously, we've got a different Act 2A depending on whether we've broken in or not. So I think maybe it would have been better to have a different version of these two rooms depending on how we've got in, because then, you could have that there's blood on the floor in the security office if you haven't got Adam Lynch with you, but there isn't if you do.
Yes, exactly. That would have made it. That kind of would have made more sense, because at the moment, I don't really understand why the security office is in disarray. It doesn't. It's in. I mean, if you look at the picture, it looks like there's been some major shit's gone down here. Apparently, Adam Lynch is oblivious. In fact, when I played this, it's only when we played it and sort of started looking. I always just imagined Adam Lynch was in the security office and was kind of, and then I realized, oh no, he's not, and he doesn't know, because surely he would say something. He doesn't know that this has happened in the security office. It's
Yeah,
it's
because
a
back on
major
Act 1A,
violence.
it says the security guard was visible through the building's front windows, oblivious to his surroundings, and then we're trying to get his attention to let us in. So he was just wandering around with his torch, just making sure everything was all right, I guess. But something has happened in the security office, and it's not clear what.
No, and the security guard himself is oblivious to whatever it is, which is. Well, I don't think he's much of a security guard to start with, because he's new, isn't he?
He is, yes. We didn't cover that, did we? When you, if you spend the clues to advance, you tap the window nearest the guard, and it makes him jump. What do you want? He asks timidly. You explain the situation. Tell him he's in grave danger. He warily opens the front door of the museum, shaking his head. I wasn't even supposed to be here today.
Yeah, that's brave.
Whereas
isn't
if
he?
you break in, like you said earlier, he sees you, cries out in fear, and then rushes towards the back of the museum. So that's a great security guard. One sign of danger, and he runs away. Unless there's been these other spooky goings on that have put him on edge, perhaps.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It's anyway. So this security office is a little bit of a. It's just not clear why it's all in disarray, but it's a helpful place to be. And depending on which one you get, I think one is there's useful supplies, and that's where you can search your deck. Whereas the other one is, it says there's maps in here which allow you to look at the other side of museum halls. So sort of again, it allows you to kind of work out which ones you should go to or not, which is kind of okay, but the problem is it's not going to be the top three. So it's the design of the scenario undercuts that function a little bit, right? Because it's not insignificant. You've got to spend 2 actions to do it.
Unless you've got Adam Lynch with you. If you've got Adam Lynch with you, his ability brings that down to 1 action. Yeah,
that's true. But it's like, well, you'd only use it with the second lot of exhibit halls. You know what I mean? It's... Yeah. So, and you may get the other security office where you don't get to use it at all. So it's only half the time you would get it. And then you would only need it for half the exhibit halls. So it kind of feels a little bit marginal, I suppose, So
I suppose the other version of the security office, every turn you can search the top 6 cards of your deck for a card. So it may be that you have stuff in your deck that would help you investigating the rest of the exhibit hall. So there is a bonus both ways, but it's not huge, I don't think, unless I'm missing something.
No, it isn't. And compare it to the map ability in Forgotten Age. I mean, that map, if you take the map along, again, spoilers. We better put a Forgotten Age spoiler at the beginning of this, I just realised. But in that one, if you've got the map, it makes a huge difference, right? It's like, It's like we wouldn't go without the map. Oh, I wouldn't. It's like it makes such a massive difference to things. Whereas this feels pretty marginal, to be honest. I like you say, the other one is much more useful. If for example you're a Leo or a Roland or someone like that, and your weapon hasn't appeared, it's a great way of getting through your deck and find something, right?
So, is it worth just flicking through the various exhibit halls that we could come across?
Oh yes, aren't they many and varied?
Definitely, with some quite amusing flavour text on some of these as well.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was laughing my head off. I've never had so much fun reading some of these. Like, whoever put them together has quite a sense of humour, I have to say.
So what we got first? First one I've got here is the Athabascan exhibit, which I show my ignorance, and I did not know what that meant. I had to Google it, but then it actually is half answered in the flavour text anyway.
Yes,
I think it basically means North American.
Indigenous North American sort of culture, which is everything from the Navajo to the Apache. It's like it's a bit of a large area, I think, of culture and things.
And it covers Alaska as well, which it says, the strange chill fills this hall as if the climate of the Alaskan wilderness has travelled along with the artifacts on display.
Yes.
And there's some quite sort of grotesque... Are they masks or heads? I'm not quite sure what they are suspended in that tank. Not a tank, is it? No, it's just display.
Just display, yes. And then there's a totem and other things.
It looks a bit like grotesque fish in a tank to me.
Yeah, they do. They do. I think it's trying to kind of give the idea it's cold in here. Is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, there's a chill. Although I have to say, I wouldn't be happy to get this exhibit hall. I think this is the one I gave a big cross for, because this one really kind of doesn't give you very much. It's kind of one you don't want to get.
It's just a hard stop, isn't it, this one? There are no clues, and you lose all of your remaining actions as soon as you walk in. Yep. But you can evade a lot while you're here.
Great. Fantastic.
To evade. Yeah, great.
Yeah, thanks. Which I suppose if the hunting horror comes swooping down, I guess that's helpful. Yeah. But it's not one you really want to stumble into if you can avoid it, really.
And sorry about this, we didn't touch on the flavour text on the unrevealed side of all of these cards.
Oh, yes.
What alluring artifacts are displayed inside. Alluring. Do they too hold a sinister secret?
Dun, 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 dun. Yes, indeed. And they've got a Tyrannosaurus Rex apparently in the Arkham, in the Miskatonic Museum. It's a bloody big museum. Isn't it?
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yes. I was looking at the revealed side then to try and find a dinosaur that I'd missed.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Medusa exhibit, which the picture looks rather alarming, asks you an alarming question: would you immortalize such a terrible fate?
I was going to say, is this suggesting that Medusa was real in the Arkham Union? We appear to have here a load of people turned to stone, terrified by Medusa. So it's 2 shroud, 1 clue per investigator here, but at least we get a victory point. So unlike the Athabascan exhibit, at least you can get something out of it.
Yeah, this is a good one. I mean, this is one you'd want.
Yeah, the only negative here is after failing a skill test while investigating this location, discard an asset you control. But it is only a 2 shroud location, so it's not too bad.
Yeah, it's one of the better ones that you'd probably want to. I mean, it's not so many clues on there, but they should be relatively easy to get. Yeah.
Next one I have is the nature exhibit.
Yes.
Lovely flavour text. Nothing about this exhibit is natural. But this is a tough one. It's a 4 shroud location with 1 clue per investigator, and as soon as you enter, you have to discard 2 cards at random as well. It's quite a tough one. This one. Again, there's another victory point on offer here.
Yeah, it's a tough victory point to earn, though. My goodness,
it is, isn't it? Yeah. Oof.
That's like that. That is tough. And then I've got here the Egyptian exhibit. Wow, I thought this Miskatonic Museum was large, but I didn't realise how large it is. If you look at this picture, it looks like it. Unless there's a mirror, it looks like it goes on forever and ever and ever. And I do like the text on this. Sandstone sculptures and bejeweled artifacts from another era clutter this exhibit like the tomb of an ancient pharaoh. So a lot of stuff. This is the opposite of the administration office. It's kind of stuff everywhere. And I guess that's why you lose in action if you fail an investigation here, because it's just so much stuff happening. I like the picture too. It's great.
2 clues per investigator on offer here on a 3-shroud location. So if you've not been lucky enough to get the higher clue versions of the security office and the admin office, at least if you stumble across this one, you might. It gives you a chance to progress. Okay, next one we have is Hall of the Dead.
Hall of the Dead.
Again, I love this flavour text. This is the Hall of the Dead. I need no reminder of my mortality. I know my death is imminent.
Isn't that great? That's so funny.
And then, like the Egyptian exhibit, it's 3 shroud and 2 clues per investigator. Only this time, if you fail a skill test while you're investigating, you have to take a horror. I guess you are horrified by what you see around you.
Yeah. So many and varied locations. And some more welcome than others. No question about that. And I think this goes back to the point that, like you were saying, if you get the good versions of the security office and the admin office and you're already flush with clues, it's less of a big deal, right? But you could potentially, in your first 3 draws, like if you end up, I'm just thinking about this, just say you start, there's 2 of you, and you get the 1-1, so you've only got 4 clues from admin and security, and you've got so you can only uncover 2. Is that right? Yeah, 2
That's
locations,
right,
and you get the Athabascan, and you get the nature exhibit. Things are looking pretty grim. Things are looking pretty grim for you, aren't they? It's like, and I'm not sure how that works story-wise, because it's like you kind of you don't know what you're doing, you don't know where you're going, and you end up kind of lost in the nature exhibit or something. I'm not sure, but yeah. You can just purely by chance, that could happen, and you're really going to then have a bit of trouble finding where you need to get to.
The final exhibit hall is the one we're looking for, the restricted hall, and the flavour text is simply exhibit not yet open. And as soon as we step into this location, that's when we would then advance the act. So again, depending on whether we were breaking and entering or not, we have a slightly different reverse of the of Act 2. So if we broke and entered, so that was when we broke and entered, that scared the security guard, he cleared off. So this is the point you would stumble across Harold Walstead. It says, when you enter the restricted hall, you find the curator of the museum clutching an ornate statue as if it were a club. His suit stained with blood. Well, that explains the blood earlier. A panicked expression on his face. The security guard you saw earlier lies in a pool of blood nearby, his intestines strewn about in a grotesque display. Your stomach turns and you resist the urge to vomit. I tried to stop it, but, the curator says quietly, his voice quivering, whatever did this, it's still nearby. And so then you can take control of Harold.
Yep.
Who will give you a +2, I've forgotten the term, book, while investigating Miskatonic locations, which is
very handy.
It is handy. It's not so handy in this scenario because we've already been through all of the Miskatonic locations to find him.
But the restricted hall is Miskatonic traded.
Yes. So it helps you on that. That one, yes.
Yeah, you're right, though, but it would have been good to have it for the nature exhibit.
You've potentially just investigated 8 or 9 other Miskatonic locations.
Thanks, Harold. Where were you when we needed you? Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And then, also, we didn't mention this earlier, like Adam Lynch as well, they both have this forced effect that, first of all, they only have 1 health and 1 sanity. And there's the forced effect that if either of them leaves play, they get removed from the game and you get an extra token in the chaos bag. So it's sort of in your interest to try and keep these guys alive, or whichever guy you ended up with, to the end of the scenario.
Yeah, and there's a sort of a mirror thing going on here. Adam Lynch helps you in the early game, and helps you in the end game, essentially.
Yes,
isn't it?
yes. And they both turn up at the point they are needed, I guess.
Yeah, and one of them meets a grisly death with his intestines everywhere.
Yes. Whereas the other way round, if we didn't break and enter, and we have Adam with us at this stage when we step into the restricted hall, when you enter the restricted hall, you find the curator of the museum lying in a pool of blood, his intestines strewn about in a grotesque display. Whatever did this, it's still nearby. And so now is where we are introduced to the hunting horror, if we have not met him already. So we have to search the encounter deck discard pile, the void, and all play areas for the hunting horror, and pop it there in the exhibit hall with you.
So if you've managed to do things super fast, you've managed to get through super fast, you can't avoid the hunting horror. This is where the hunting horror is going to turn up no matter what.
Yes. And then that takes us to Act 3A, searching for the tome. Somewhere here in this area is Olaus Wormius's Latin translation of the Necronomicon. You must find it and escape if you can. And the objective is, if there are no clues in the exhibit hall restricted hall, we can advance. But the exhibit hall has this extra text on it saying while the hunting horror is at this location, it cannot be investigated. Yes. So we're in there, blood all over the floor, guts and everything. But now the hunting horror has just slithered out, and we have to deal with him or her before we can actually progress the story.
Yes. Now, can I maybe it'd be a good point to just talk about the hunting horror a little bit, because the agenda essentially is the same thing over and over again, right? So all the agenda is doing is, if the hunting horror is not already out, it just brings the hunting horror out every time you progress the agenda.
And also, when he enters play, we add Shadow Spawned to it as well.
Yep.
Or if Shadow Spawned is already on it, it gets a resource added to it. So
yeah.
Interesting mechanic to beef the hunting horror up.
Yeah, and I guess it's trying to get this idea that each time it attacks and gets repelled, the museum is getting darker and it's getting bigger. It's sort of getting stronger. But it seems a little bit clumsy having two. I wonder why they needed two cards. Couldn't they have just you've got always when you bring out the hunting horror, you've got to bring out this extra card to tag along with it. Because they're never separated, right? You can't have the hunting horror without its other card that goes with it, right?
I wonder if it's literally just down to the amount of text and they couldn't fit it all on one card.
Yeah,
the hunting horror's card is pretty full text-wise, isn't it? Because of that.
It is.
Clumsily worded forced ability.
Yeah.
Which is basically reveal a token if it's a symbol he readies.
Yes.
At the start of the enemy phase. But it takes only 4 lines to explain that.
Yeah. And then the other thing about the hunting horror, a little bit like the rest of this campaign, is this is another example of a monster just being there or turning up without there's sort of no explanation as to why it's there, you know what I mean? So we saw this in the first 2 scenarios, that there's just this monster there. We don't know how it got there, why it's there. And again, this makes it different. Like, for example, in the other museum campaign that I keep referring to, which is Echoes of the Past, for example, in that one, it's much more that there's cultists running around the museum while you're there trying to get something when you're trying to get it at the same time, you know what I mean? And so there's this race between you and the cultists to try and find the book or whatever it is. I can't remember what it is for that particular scenario. But this feels a bit more tacked on. This feels a bit more like we don't know why it's there. It's sort of just there, It's sort of this thing again of sort of having a monster in the scenario without any real understanding of how it got there or why it's there, and why Adam Lynch and Harold Walstead aren't particularly concerned about it, or maybe they're in the same position we are. There's a whole bunch of acolytes of Yog Sothoth running around causing havoc, but whilst we interface with them a little bit, it feels like we don't very much. It's more just these sort of one-off monsters or a couple of monsters that sort of crash into the scenario without rhyme or reason, and they're the things we have to deal with. I mean, it's fine. I mean, it's not like it's like terrible or anything. It's a perfectly fine mechanic. It's just not really clear why it's here or that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
It's just there. Whether it's, I don't know, whether it's somebody was messing around with the Necronomicon and summoned it, whether it's, I don't know. You're right. There's no explanation. It's just there. And
it's not like it's there to stop us getting is it there to stop us getting the Necronomicon, or is it there to try and get the Necronomicon itself, or is it just coincidence? You know what I mean?
Lucky us, yes.
Yeah, exactly. You know, is Armitage going to say later, oh, and by the way, at the museum, just watch out for that hunting horror.
Yeah, we were messing around earlier. You'll never guess what we summoned up.
And I mean, there are, and I mean, it does put a lot of tension. I mean, you know, depending again, in some games you can barely see the hunting horror until, like you say, you get to Act 3A if you're fast enough. Whereas in others, the hunting horror could turn up multiple times, right? Particularly if you get the slithering behind you encounter card, and you're just sort of unlucky, you know, and the agenda sort of moves forward quite a pace.
I was going to say, each time the agenda advances, he'll come back into play.
Yes, exactly. So,
then, like you say, it can be summoned from the encounter deck as well.
Yeah. So he really, I mean, he or she, I should say, it is the biggest variable really in the scenario, because I think with the agenda, there's about 20. You've got about 20 turns. I think you've got 20 turns, right? You've got 19, and we start. So you've got 20 turns.
Yes.
And it takes a couple of turns to sort of get going and get into the museum hall. So you've got about 18 turns to get to those bottom 3 exhibits, which doesn't feel too bad. I mean, compared to, you know, Midnight Mass or something, it's a leisurely stroll on a summer's evening, you know. But what could really mess things up is the hunting horror, and whether you are restricted and how many clues you're managing to get, I guess.
One thing we haven't touched on in this podcast so far is the contents of the Chaos Bag. So the standard, in terms of the symbols, is a couple of skulls and a cultist. So no tablet, no Elder Thing. And I'm just trying to remember now. I think a tablet gets added to the bag if you didn't save the students. I think that's right. Or was it an Elder Thing?
Let me have a look. I've just got it here.
One or the other.
Just have a look.
It's a tablet.
Tablet.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then an Elder Thing gets added to the bag if you cheated.
Yep. Yes,
so
that's right.
It's interesting to see how these earlier decisions can actually affect you. So if you didn't save the students, you now have a tablet in the bag, and the tablet is a -2, and whether you fail or not, you have to return a clue to your current location.
Ouch.
So that is quite a significant penalty there.
For this scenario, yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah, and then the Elder Thing is a -3. If you fail, discard an asset you control. But at least if you pass, you keep it. That tablet one is quite nasty for this scenario. So it's like the guilt of letting those students die is getting to you a little bit.
Getting to you, yeah. And interesting, the cultist one is, it's only a -1, but if you do fail, so if you're being a bit, you know, playing it a bit close to the edge, you've got to get the hunting horror, right? So there's another way of getting the hunting horror add onto the table as well. And you really want to minimize that, because what you don't want to end up is you're in the exhibit hall, you've got to get, you know, your clues, And, the hunting horror's got like +2 or +3 on it or something, it becomes really tough. Yeah. The other thing I realized is one of the encounter cards is ephemeral exhibits. I don't know if you saw this one. Ephemeral exhibits, which had a bit of nice flavor text on it as well. Which is a test an intellect of 3. If you fail, lose an action for each point you fail by, which sort of delays you. But there's this thing: are you watching the exhibits, or the exhibits watching you? It's like, oh, and she's in this spooky kind of place where they're all sort of wearing look like medieval clothing, and you're just not sure. Yeah, they all look a bit spooky. Yeah.
There's somebody watching her from the balcony as well.
Yeah, there is actually. Yeah, I just assumed that was an investigator, but maybe not.
Maybe that's an investigator, and this is no. That's not a mannequin, is it? That is actually That is actually the investigator at the front. Interesting.
Yeah. So here we are in the restricted hall. We found it. The hunting horror is on us, so we can't do any investigating tool. So basically, you got to fight these things. There's no way you do this as a solo seeker.
No. His basic stats are fight of 2, health of 3, and 2 evade, but they all get boosted by shadow spawned by 1 each for each resource on shadow spawned.
Yeah.
And I think the wasn't the ruling that when it returns to the void, don't the tokens stay on shadow spawn?
Yes, they do.
That next time he comes out, another resource goes on him, and he's beefed up even further. So
that's right.
The third time he comes out, you're dealing with 5 fight, 8 health, 7, 5. No, sorry, 4. Yeah, third time he comes out, he'll be 5, 6, 5.
Yeah.
Stats. So these gets quite significant.
So what it suggests is this scenario really does reward. I mean, quite a lot of scenarios do, but this scenario does reward speed. It's saying that if you get to this Necronomicon quick, you can get out fast, and that's sort of the way. This isn't like a stroll in the woods. There's you really don't want to be messing around in this museum, essentially.
But obviously, the downside there, though, you race through it to get the successful resolution as easily as possible. But because you've raced through it, you've not gained as much experience, and so you can't upgrade your deck quite as much because if you play like we played last week, straight to the exhibit hall, and I think we earned something like 1 XP or something ridiculous. Yeah,
that's right. Rather than lingering and let's go and have a look at the Medusa exhibit. You could sort of wander around. And again, if it's a 4-player game, that's going to be much more what's going to happen, right? Because there's more people, everybody can sort of wander into a hall and sort of do it that way. But yes, if you don't want to get caught up with the hunting horror too much, like you say, you're not going to see very much, and therefore you're not going to learn very much, and so you won't get much experience from it. No. And it's not like the hunting horror. The hunting horror itself doesn't have it's not like you can get any victory points from the hunting horror itself. So
no, because you never defeat it, do you?
No. It's not like if it's in the void at the the end of the scenario, for example, you get the victory points or something like that. You just don't get any, which is kind of a bit rough, really, when you think about it. It's a little bit on the rough side because it can mean that you can. I mean, and even then, there's 4 victory points to be had in the whole thing?
I think there's 5 in total, because the exhibit hall's got 1. There's 4 on the other exhibit hall location.
Oh, and then there's the restrict. Yeah, so there's 5. Yeah, which isn't massive, really. So I think you're right. It suggests a quick in, quick out. Don't really learn very much in the process, kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, once we defeat the hunting horror, or at least getting back to the void, should I say, we can then investigate the exhibit hall. Shroud of 3, 2 clues per investigator. So we hoover those clues up, and then we can progress the act.
The picture shows the Necronomicon quite proudly displayed right there. Not sure why you need so many clues to. It's not like it's the Egyptian exhibit where you're looking for things in a sort of untidy room. I mean, I'm looking at this picture here. It looks like it's pretty obvious where it is. So I'm not sure why it takes you so many clues to kind of. I suppose it's just a way of.
I guess we don't know which of those halls it is in, or even though there was a map in the security office.
Yeah, that's true.
We then advance Act 3A. So yes, if there are no clues remaining on the exhibit hall restricted hall, advance. At last, you find the locked case. Yeah, well, you could smash it, I suppose, containing the Necronomicon. The tome, over 800 pages in length, is filled with all manner of macabre imagery, formulae, spells, prophecies, and descriptions of creatures from beyond the threshold of space.
It's Harry Potter. It's Harry Potter. Isn't that Harry Potter?
Without a doubt, it is a dangerous book, but its secrets could be very useful. So there we have a very interesting decision.
Yes,
and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this the first time we just make a choice, and that will then give you a different resolution? It's not based on how you've played the game. It's you make a decision now.
Yes,
it's either too dangerous to keep around, we have to destroy it, resolution 1, or it's too valuable to destroy, we have to keep it safe, resolution 2.
And again, here's this theme of. One or the other, you know what I mean? It's like this theme of either or. There's it's like everything seems to be you can only save one person, the other one gets kidnapped. You know what I mean? One person's going to get murdered. It's very binary. There's a lot of binary things going on in this particular campaign.
So first of all, let's have a look at the Necronomicon itself. That might help us decide whether we want to keep it or not. It's a very ominous looking book. The flavour text says it was Abdul al-Hazred's magnum opus.
This was a Lovecraft. He was the sort of mad prophet who created the Necronomicon that Lovecraft was always banging on about. He created the original one, and so that's why it's his magnum opus. Right. But then it got translated multiple times. This is a specific
translation, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
So it's an asset. It costs 2 to put it in play, but when it's in play, you get +1 intellect. Mm-hmm. And you can also take an action to gain 2 resources, which doesn't exhaust it. So you could gain. You could just sit there and just money. Yes. And also, obviously, it's a static boost to your intellect for your investigation throughout the rest of the campaign. So the question is, do we give in to temptation and keep the Necronomicon, or do we destroy it? And interestingly, there are consequences later on in the campaign, which we can touch on now. I might have missed something, but I believe there is only one direct consequence, and that is when you're setting up Where Doom Awaits, which is the next to last scenario. Yeah. There's 3 different changes to the setup. The first one is if you restore Silas Bishop on a later scenario. The second one is if the Necronomicon was stolen. And the third is anything else. So basically, Seth isn't there if we restored Silas. Seth is there if the Necronomicon was stolen. Seth is there, but he is damaged for any other outcome. So the decision is then, we destroy the Necronomicon or we take custody of the Necronomicon. Looking at those 2 resolutions, if you take the Necronomicon, you get to add it to your deck, or one of you does, should I say, but you have to add an Elder Thing Chaos token for the rest of the campaign. And then subsequently, if you are defeated in any other scenario and you have the Necronomicon, it is then classed as stolen anyway.
Yep.
So you could give in to temptation, take the Necronomicon, get an extra Chaos token in the bag, and then lose it on the very next scenario. So I guess it's all down to how well you think you can survive each scenario as to whether there's the benefit. Because otherwise you could end up with that Elder Thing token in the bag for the rest of the campaign and no Necronomicon anyway.
Yeah. And the other problem with it is it's not a permanent. So it's not like it sits, right there all the time.
You've still got to find it and play it, haven't you, each round, each scenario.
Yeah. Now, I suppose if you're someone like a Daisy or Harvey Walters, who really kind of deals in tomes a lot, and you're using people like Whitten Green, so you get extra tome slots and all that kind of thing, then I can see that, there could be an advantage to taking it. But I think apart from that, it starts to feel a bit, and you wouldn't know this the first time you play, but it feels a bit marginal. It feels a bit marginal because you would have to draw it and then you would have to use it and get the benefit from it. But the downsides are quite significant and they're lasting throughout, like you say. So it feels pretty marginal. Yeah.
It's not just one thing happens later on in the scenario. You are adding a bad Chaos token, and I mean, just looking at this scenario, obviously it wouldn't take effect on this scenario, but the Elder Thing token was a -3, which was significantly the highest negative symbol token, and I suspect it's the same on subsequent scenarios.
And you could conceivably, if you cheated. If you, and in extracurricular activity, if you didn't save the students, isn't that right? You get a tablet.
Yeah, if you didn't save the students, you get a tablet, and if you cheated, you get an Elder Thing.
Oh, and then Adam Lynch, say he dies, hunting horror and all that. So there's 2 tablets. Then you take the Necronomicon. So you could end up with 2 Elder Things and 2 tablets moving forward.
Yes.
Which starts to really, really mess with the chaos.
Significantly worsen your odds, doesn't it? Yes.
Yeah. It starts to it's actually, from a story perspective, it's really great because what it's showing is that the consequences of what's happening are starting to build quite nastily. From a gameplay perspective, it's making things quite a bit more chaotic and nasty.
Yes, it's not a change to the story as such. It's just making things more difficult for you because of the decisions you've made, or the things you let happen.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think the first time you play, I can imagine you'd be, why would you burn it? Geez, I'm sure it's something that can help me, but actually, I think for most investigators. And I can imagine for a solo investigator with relatively low intellect, it might be attractive as well.
Yeah.
I can imagine if you
resource poor as well.
Resource poor. I was going to say, what's that weakness where you start with 2 fewer resources? Indebted. Like if you've got indebted for the whole game, you might think, well, this is something that can help me. Yeah, that's right. So there are some, but I think for most of the time, you're probably better off burning the bloody thing.
Yes, I would agree there. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I know we've just talked about the mechanics of the 2 resolutions there, but shall we look at it from a story point of view?
Yes.
So the first one is, no resolution was reached, each investigator resigned or was defeated. Whatever the creature in the museum was, you neither had the will nor the tools to destroy it. It seems you must give up any hope of recovering the Necronomicon. Even so, there are others depending on you. Gathering your courage, you prepare for your next task. So then, yes, campaign log, we failed to recover the Necronomicon. So resolution 1, which is we destroyed the Necronomicon. As long as this translation of the Necronomicon exists, there will be sorcerers and other foul agents like Whatley seeking it. In the end, you know what must be done to protect humanity from the threats you've seen. You find a trash bin, fill it with books and documents, throwing the Necronomicon on top. It takes several matches to set the contents of the bin alight. The flames fill the room with heat and the creeping shadows retreat from its light. You watch the book burn for some time, its pages turn to ash. you can only hope you've made the right decision.
Hmm.
And then, yes, so we record in the campaign log that we have destroyed it. And then resolution 2, which is where it gets interesting. The Necronomicon is more than just a book, it is a tool. Within its pages is a wealth of information about the forces and creatures you have encountered. Knowing how useful it could be in your endeavours, how could you possibly bring yourself to destroy it? Besides, as long as you keep the book safely in your possession, you will still be foiling those who seek to use it for nefarious purposes. So you record that you took custody of the Necronomicon. One of the investigators can add it to their deck. But, interestingly, you have given in to the temptation of power. Add an Elder Thing Chaos token to the Chaos bag for the remainder of the campaign.
Yes. Yeah, very, very interesting
stuff.
It's lovely how it actually justifies whichever one you choose.
Yes.
But the thing I just realised it before is that if you decide to burn it, you throw it in a trash bin with, quote, you fill it with books and documents. So what, you go around the museum grabbing a whole lot of other books?
I know the best thing to burn a book. Another book.
That's right. This is sort of getting a bit sinister, burning a whole lot of books and documents, just gathering them up and just burning it. It's like, oh, okay. And then I think we were talking about this off air, was that it takes you quite a few matches to kind of set it alight.
Yes. It does not want to burn.
I just imagine your hand, shaking as you're trying to get this thing going and everything. It's, yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And interestingly, I can imagine the first time you play, if you got resolution 1, so you resigned or were defeated, you'd be feeling a bit like, oh, this is terrible. Oh, my goodness. But actually, it's not that bad. Actually, if you don't manage to get the Necronomicon, you fail to get it. It's actually not that bad. It's not really that consequential.
Yeah, the only consequence is, like I mentioned earlier, that's set up in Where Doom Awaits, whether Seth is damaged or not. So just on that point, Kevling, if there's no resolution reached, is the story assumption it gets stolen, it gets taken anywhere? Because it doesn't say that. I've just flicked ahead. Sorry, I've just looked at Where Doom Awaits. If the investigators failed to recover the Necronomicon, or if the Necronomicon was stolen, so that is when Seth is there at full power. So I think, yes, they do get it. If we don't get it, they will.
That makes complete sense. It's just kind of unfortunate they don't make that point at the time if you're defeated. You know what I mean? It's that you failed to secure the Necronomicon, and then there's some mention of it being stolen. Do you know what I mean? That would have raised the stakes. I mean, it would have foreshadowed that something, but I think it would have just raised the tension a little bit more for failure, because it does say you must give up any hope of recovering the Necronomicon. So I suppose the implication there is that you haven't been able to secure it. Yeah.
But yes, it could have been a little bit more explicit, saying now there is nothing to stop.
Yes.
Your enemies getting hold of it.
Yeah. Or reports of a break-in or something to sort of that kind of thing, because it wasn't too difficult for us to get in and get to the exhibit hall. I mean, really, if it isn't for the hunting horror, it's actually not too difficult at all to get to the restricted hall. It's actually fairly straightforward. So excellent. So there we go. So what do you think about this scenario? Just generally then, Kevling, what were your thoughts?
I didn't really have any issue with it until we started doing this podcast. And then some of the flaws within it became a little more apparent. Yes. I must admit, when I do play these games, I do just tend to let the story flow over me rather than overly analyse it. But it is clear, I think, from the structure of this scenario, how they've learned from it. in future scenarios. So, as we mentioned earlier, with the introduction of the explore mechanic in Forgotten Age, so different ways of replicating that feeling of exploring the unknown and searching for something. Unlike this one, where you know it is in room 4, 5, or 6, so you may as well just go straight to one of those 3.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't mind this scenario. I like the idea of a spooky museum, and I think they've added a lot of flavour. I mean, it's nice to think of Arkham with this sort of neoclassical spooky museum, and I think they did a good job with the exhibit halls. I think they're all nice and different, and they're
definitely,
and I think they really kind of brought them to life. And the flavour text on some of them was fantastic and quite amusing at times. So I think that's all really quite good. But I think the thing is, like you said, and I think of Echoes of the Past, which is set in the Historical Society, is a kind of takes this idea and sort of elevates it to another level. Whereas this seems like a first sort of go at a sort of an interior. And I think it's the fact that there's not more structure. We talked about this. There's not more structure to the locations, but also the kind of the randomness isn't truly random. So like we talked about before, you can kind of, once you know it, you can game it to a degree.
Yes.
Plus, you could be just lucky and get more clues because you happen to choose the right admin and security office mix. Or you could be the opposite and be really unlucky. So that feels, I'm not sure why they did it that way. Don't really understand why they didn't make the admin offices and security offices the same. But those things, and then the hunting horror just sort of being there, I think they're the main things that for me are less successful about this scenario, and kind of undercut the story a little bit because of that.
Yes, from a narrative point of view, I would agree. Mechanically, I do like the idea of this monster that you just cannot defeat and it will keep coming back. It's almost like the Terminator. It will not stop until you are dead. Yeah, we don't know why it's there. We don't know what it's doing. We don't know what its objectives are. We don't know who summoned it or how or anything about it. It's just something to deal with in the spooky museum.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think the unrelenting monster. I think there's a scenario in the Forgotten Age, isn't there, where you're in a kind of you're in an underground sort of warren cavern, and you're getting to a location, and you've got to run all the way back, and there's something kind of hounding you the whole way.
Yes.
That works really, really well as well, and I think that it really raises up the tension. In this one, there's less tension because the hunting horror can spend a lot of time in a void, just literally just nowhere, and then it can just sort of pop up. So it's less relenting in that sense. But yes, I agree with you, and I think you're right. I think as a scenario, it's fine. I think they they take this idea and, like you say, work with it and refine it a bit more in later campaigns. All right, so fantastic. I think we've pretty much done this one to death, haven't we?
I think we have. Yes, this is actually a lot longer podcast than I was expecting it to be.
Yeah.
Probably. I think our super fast playthrough last week probably gave us some false hope there. So where are we going next then, Robert?
Well, I think we're off to the Essex. We're off on the train. I think it's time for a little train ride. I think into the countryside. Yes.
Yeah, so as a taste of things to come, the opening paragraph of the next scenario, recent events in the museum have forced you to re-evaluate Armitage's tale. It cannot be a coincidence. Wilbur Whatley, the Necronomicon, the creature from Dunwich, the people and creatures who attacked here in Arkham, everything must be connected. You're certain now where you must head. The lonely and dismal town of Dunwich Village. Mm-hmm. So that is where we are off to.
Yes.
But we've got to get there first.
Oh, yes, yes, that's right.
Yeah, I am looking forward to this one because it's completely different to any scenario that's come before it, isn't it?
It is quite different, and I'm not sure that there's many scenarios like it afterwards, actually. It is quite a special, unique scenario and a bit polarizing. I think, I don't know. I think some people really like it and other people not so keen on it. I'm not sure. But yes,
I think from reactions I've heard, it's one of these scenarios that can either go superbly or terribly, and there is no middle ground.
Yes, I think though it's a very evocative scenario, and I'm very much looking forward to getting on the train and exploring the Essex County Express. So so it's been fantastic. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening. I'm CrabbyTerror8.
I'm Kevling.
I'll see you later.
Bye.
So thank you very much for listening. Please like, comment and subscribe. We'd very much like to hear from you. If you would like to send us your thoughts, send it to ftextpodcast@gmail.com. That's FTEXT podcast, ftextpodcast@gmail.com. You can also listen to this podcast on YouTube. Just go to Out of Ammo, Out of Time, and you will find it there. And it's also available on the usual podcast platforms. Till then, thanks very much for listening and see you soon. Bye-bye.